What happens when the most polarizing conservative voice in America walks onto daytime TV's most liberal couch? What happens when civility is expected, but confrontation is inevitable? This wasn't a conversation. It was a collision waiting to happen. The lights inside Studio TV 7 were blinding. The familiar theme music of The View echoed through the rafters as cameras panned over a smiling audience. Viewers at home had no idea what was coming. In the wings, Ben Shapiro adjusted his cufflinks, composed, sharp, untouched by the swarm of producers bustling around him. 3 minutes, someone called out. Ben nodded once. His face betrayed no nervousness, but a stage manager whispered to a colleague, "You feel that? Something's off today." Meanwhile, on the set, Whoopi Goldberg leaned over to her co-hosts, lips tight. "Let's keep it real with him," she said, more warning than suggestion. The energy in the studio shifted. What was pitched to Ben's team as a spirited but respectful conversation was taking on a different shape. Backstage, Ben's assistant Jordan glanced at the pre-show notes. The topics listed didn't match the ones discussed during pre-interview. "Last-minute changes?" he asked a producer. "Just a little flexibility," came the too casual reply. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. Ben walked out to polite applause, his expression cool. He shook hands, took his seat. And then, Whoopi leaned in. "Let's get into it," she said. The ambush had already begun. What came next would leave the audience stunned and the industry scrambling. 2 hours earlier in the cool of the green room, something felt off. Ben sat alone, scrolling headlines, sipping a black coffee he hadn't touched. Jordan stood near the door, watching a flurry of crew members rush past with hushed urgency. The studio was unusually tense for what was, ostensibly, a daytime interview. A production assistant had brought in a revised prep sheet twice, each version slightly different from what Ben's publicist had confirmed days before. That wasn't protocol, that was strategy. Jordan leaned down. "You want to pull it?" Ben looked up, voice calm. "Number. Let them talk. I came here to make a point, not to play safe." Minutes later, one of the segment producers popped in. "Ben, quick heads up. We might expand the conversation into some cultural topics. Little spontaneity." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Cultural topics? Like, oh, just current events. Nothing crazy." Nothing crazy. He'd been around media long enough to recognize the signs. They weren't setting up an interview. They were setting up a spectacle. Jordan crossed his arms. "Did we not already agree?" But the producer was gone. Ben's eyes narrowed slightly. They want a viral moment. Outside, the applause for the opening monologue echoed through the halls. Laughter, yes, but nervous underneath. The kind of laughter that precedes a storm. Jordan leaned closer, voice low. "Whoopi's in the pre-show notes now. She wasn't supposed to lead this." Ben nodded once. "Then she'll lead it." He stood. It was time. And the ambush would begin with a smile. The studio lights hit like searchlights. Ben stepped onto the set, clean-cut and camera-ready, met with polite applause that felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. He smiled anyway, tight, deliberate, and took his seat at the far right of the semicircle. Across from him sat Whoopi Goldberg, who greeted him with a practiced smile. But her eyes didn't follow. "Ben Shapiro," she announced, her voice controlled but flat. "The man with a million opinions and a million critics." A ripple of laughter from the audience. Forced, choreographed. Ben offered a nod. "Pleasure to be here." Joy Behar chimed in next, flipping through her cards. "Let's jump right in, shall we? You've been quite the fire starter on social media lately, especially with your thoughts on, let's say, gender and politics." Ben shifted slightly. He was ready. "Sure, let's have that discussion." But it wasn't a discussion they wanted. It was theater. And he knew it. Whoopi leaned forward, the smile still plastered to her face. A lot of people say you speak at people, not to them. That you don't come to understand, you come to dominate." Ben didn't flinch. "Is that what you think, or just something a lot of people say?" The tension snapped like a string. A few nervous chuckles, mostly silence. Whoopi blinked just once. The tone had been set. This wasn't about opinions. This was about power. And Ben had just refused to bow. In that moment, the show turned, and the trap began to spring. Hours earlier, Whoopi's makeup artist had sensed it. "She's in one of those moods," she whispered to a stagehand, blending foundation under Whoopi's cheekbone. "When she gets like this, there's no pulling her back." Whoopi sat stiffly in the chair, phone in hand, scrolling through a clip of Ben Shapiro on a college panel dismantling a protester's argument. Her jaw was tight. Her thumb hovered over the pause button but never tapped it. She didn't need to. She'd seen enough. "He thinks he's clever," she muttered, not to anyone in particular. "Let's see how clever he is on my stage." Backstage, Joy was thumbing through her note cards. The segment had been shifted at the last minute, with producers inserting bullet points that weren't approved by Ben's team. Culture war topics, race, gender identity, police, landmines, all of them. Sunny Hostin had stayed quiet most of the morning. She was watching, calculating. She'd seen this before. When Whoopi went cold, it was never a debate. It was an execution. The crew picked up on the energy. The stage manager told one camera operator to stay tight on Whoopi's expressions and another to cut wide if things get loud. Producers hovered near the soundboard, already prepping the button for a cut to commercial. Just in case. Ben, meanwhile, remained composed in his own prep room. He brushed lint off his lapel, checked his mic. No entourage, no warm-up act. Just a man, a suit, and an idea he refused to back down from. And walking into a room full of people sharpening knives. What was supposed to be a conversation was becoming a war zone. The show opened like any other. Theme music blaring, hosts waving, cameras panning across the clapping crowd. But beneath the polished veneer, something was different. Ben sat quietly, stage right, flanked by producers who gave quick nods and whispered, "Just be yourself." That was the last neutral sentence he'd hear that morning. On stage, Whoopi welcomed viewers with a practiced warmth. "Today, we've got a special guest joining us, a man who's got plenty to say and no problem saying it. Please welcome Ben Shapiro." Polite applause followed. Not thunderous, not hostile. Just measured. Ben walked on, no hesitation, no theatrics. He shook Whoopi's hand first, then Joy's, then the others, taking his seat with a composed nod. The table curved around him like a crescent blade. Whoopi wasted no time. "So, Ben," she began, "you call yourself a facts-first guy, but a lot of people think your facts are just conservative talking points dressed up in rapid-fire delivery." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Well, I'd invite anyone to debate the facts themselves, not the delivery speed." The audience chuckled. A few clapped. Joy interrupted, voice sugary. "Don't you think that kind of tone alienates people?" Ben leaned in slightly. "You mean the tone where I answer questions directly?" Laughter again, but this time split. Some appreciated the jab, others tensed. Sunny Hostin jumped in. "You've made statements about race and policing that many find deeply offensive. Would you like to explain why you keep doubling down?" Ben looked over the table, his jaw tightened. "I came here to discuss real issues," he said. "Not be sandbagged." Whoopi's smile disappeared, and that was the first real crack in the facade. It came from Whoopi. "So, Ben," she said, folding her hands with exaggerated calm, "you've called systemic racism a myth. That's a bold position to take. In 2025, the studio murmured. Some in the audience nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Ben didn't blink. "I've said that the data doesn't support the existence of systemic racism in law enforcement today. That's not a feeling. That's based on the numbers." Joy leaned in. "But people live that reality, Ben. Don't numbers sometimes erase nuance?" Ben turned toward her. "Numbers reveal nuance, Joy. If we're just going to elevate anecdote over analysis, we're not having a discussion. We're telling bedtime stories." A few gasps, one isolated clap. Sunny Hostin narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying lived experiences don't matter?" Ben adjusted in his seat. "They matter, but they're not evidence of a national pattern unless they're backed by broader data." Whoopi was silent for a moment, watching him with the intensity of a chess player considering a sacrifice. Then she smiled, sharp as glass. "It must be nice," she said slowly, "to live in a world where you can detach from what people actually go through, because it doesn't affect you." Ben's eyes narrowed. "And it must be convenient to dismiss evidence because it's politically inconvenient." A low, audible "ooh" rolled through the studio like thunder. The air shifted. That wasn't just pushback. That was the first punch, and Ben had countered it without raising his voice. The gloves were off, and the next blow would come fast. The shift wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. Whoopi's tone changed, less host, more prosecutor. "So let's talk about what really drives you, Ben," she said, voice low as if she were easing into something intimate. "You grew up with privilege. You had elite schooling, yet you spend your career lecturing working-class people, communities of color, women, on how they should feel." Ben sat still, her eyes locked on his. "Why do you think you know better than everyone else what oppression looks like?" The audience stiffened. Ben's brow lifted slightly. "Is this an interview or an interrogation?" Whoopi didn't blink. "It's a conversation, unless you're uncomfortable being challenged." That line got a murmur of applause, short, hesitant. Ben leaned forward. "I'm not uncomfortable with challenge, Whoopi. I'm uncomfortable with being misrepresented. Criticizing ideas isn't the same as denying pain, but I won't pretend false narratives are true just to earn applause." Whoopi crossed her arms. "Sounds like deflection." "No," Ben replied. "It sounds like honesty." Joy threw in, "But it feels like you're always punching down." Ben didn't even turn toward her. "That assumes I view people below me. I don't. I see adults capable of reason, not victims." A beat passed. You could feel the pulse of the room quicken. Whoopi nodded slowly. "Then prove it. Stop hiding behind data and say what you really believe. You think the people complaining about oppression are just making excuses, don't you?" Ben's expression hardened. He didn't answer right away, and he didn't need to, because the silence was louder than anything he could say. Ben adjusted the mic clipped to his lapel. When he spoke, his tone was slower now, measured, surgical. "I believe victimhood has become currency in our culture," he said. "I believe people are incentivized to identify with oppression rather than overcome it. And I believe truth doesn't change based on who's offended by it." Dead silence. Joy blinked. Sunny shifted in her chair. Whoopi leaned back slowly like she'd just been dared to respond. But Ben wasn't finished. "I've never claimed that people don't suffer. I've claimed that the reason they suffer isn't always the story they've been told. If you're born poor, if you struggle, fine. But telling someone they're doomed because of their skin color or gender? That's not empathy, that's disempowerment wrapped in pity." The audience didn't know how to respond. A few clapped, a few booed, the rest just stared. Sunny spoke next, her voice tight. "You talk about truth, but your truth often dismisses the lived pain of people who don't look like you. Doesn't that matter?" Ben turned toward her, tone calm but unrelenting. "It matters. But we don't build solutions on emotion alone. We need honesty, even if it's uncomfortable, especially then." Whoopi sat up straighter. "Uncomfortable truth is one thing. Weaponized indifference is another." Ben nodded once. "And selective outrage masquerading as virtue? That's not justice. That's theater." For the first time since he walked onto the set, the audience broke into loud applause. Not for Whoopi, for him. And that's when the show lost control. The applause was unexpected. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. A smattering of claps, some nods, a murmur of agreement from the studio crowd not known for siding with conservative voices. It rattled the table. Whoopi glanced toward a producer offstage, a flicker of annoyance flashing across her face. Joy Behar quickly leaned into her mic, voice rising. "Well, if we're clapping for condescension now, maybe I should just start reading Ayn Rand quotes," she quipped. Laughter, awkward and uneven, tried to stitch the tension back together. It didn't work. Sunny Hostin jumped in, more pointed now. "Ben, let's cut to it. You've minimized systemic racism, dismissed gender identity, and now you're basically saying oppressed people are imagining things. Why should anyone listen to you? Ben looked across the table. His posture hadn't changed, but his voice dropped an octave. Because I'm not asking anyone to believe me because of my identity. I'm asking them to believe me because the facts hold up. If that's not enough, maybe we've stopped caring about truth altogether. A low whistle came from somewhere in the audience. Whoopi chuckled bitterly. So we should ignore lived experience? And because you brought charts? Ben's eyes didn't leave hers. Number, we should acknowledge lived experience, but we don't build policy on pain, we build it on principle. The studio was silent again. Not bored, not confused, divided. The segment producer off stage whispered into her headset. He's controlling the rhythm. We're losing the room. Whoopi's jaw clenched. She was about to take back the narrative. By force, if necessary. The show was supposed to cut to commercial. The timing was there. The cue card had been lifted. The floor manager gave the rap signal, but Whoopi didn't stop. She stared past the cameras, waved off the producer, and leaned in. No break, she said flatly. Ben noticed. Everyone noticed. The band's filler music, queued up for transition, sputtered and faded out. Confused applause scattered, then died completely. Back at the table, the temperature dropped. You know what I think, Ben? Whoopi began, her voice slow, deliberate. I think you came here to provoke. I think you knew you'd be sitting at a table of women, women of color, and you calculated exactly how to push every button. Ben's lips parted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Whoopi pressed on. I think the smirks, the interruptions, the stats, all of it's part of a performance. You don't come here for conversation. You come here to make a scene. So you can go back to your YouTube channel and spin it into a 10-minute rant. Ben exhaled once through his nose. Are you finished? No, Whoopi snapped. I'm not. Because what you're doing isn't intellectual debate, it's cowardice. You hide behind language. You dress it up like logic, but it's still an attack. Ben folded his hands calmly. Are you accusing me of thought crimes now? A collective gasp. Jordan backstage stood up. Do we need to intervene? One producer muttered. No, another said, eyes glued to the monitor. Let it burn. And burn it did. Because the next line would ignite the fuse. Here's chapter 11. Backstage, the control room was unraveling. Why didn't we go to break? The executive producer barked into his headset. She waved it off, the stage manager replied, eyes locked on Whoopi's unblinking glare. Cut her mic if this keeps going, someone muttered. We can't. We'll have a riot in the studio. In the shadows just off stage, Jordan, Ben's assistant, stood frozen behind a curtain, eyes flicking between the monitor feed and the chaos unfolding just beyond it. She's not sticking to the segment flow, Jordan said aloud. None of them are, another tech whispered. This isn't The View anymore. It's a battleground. On screen, the set was still technically live. No commercial, no buffer. The audience was silent, not disinterested, but spellbound. A train wreck you couldn't look away from. At the table, Ben sat like a statue, not flinching, not folding. Across from him, Whoopi had abandoned any pretense of humor or civility. This isn't your podcast, Ben, she said. This is real people, real consequences. Ben responded coolly. Exactly. That's why I don't take moral lectures from multimillionaires who only talk to people they agree with. It hit hard. The crowd stirred, half in awe, half in recoil. Backstage, a junior producer turned to the head writer. This is going to be the only thing trending for the next 3 days. And it hasn't even peaked yet, the head writer replied, eyes wide. Because they all knew something irreversible was about to happen. There was a moment, just half a breath, when time seemed to stop. Ben looked directly at Whoopi, tone even, no trace of malice. Just clarity. You invited me here under the guise of a dialogue, he said. Instead, you created a spectacle. You didn't ask questions. You made accusations. You don't want to hear my views. You want to shame them into silence. The words hit the air like a gavel. Whoopi's expression changed, not to surprise, to fury. You don't get to sit here, she snapped, on our platform, and act like a victim while you invalidate the struggles of people you've never cared about. Ben didn't flinch. Disagreeing with your narrative isn't invalidating, it's dissent. You want equality? That includes hearing views that challenge you. Challenge? Whoopi scoffed. You're not challenging me, you're insulting us. You walk in here with your smug tone, your cherry-picked stats, and your built-in fan base waiting to spin this moment into martyrdom. He held her gaze. No spin needed. You're doing the work for me. And that was it. Whoopi stood. No, she said, pointing toward him, her voice louder now. That's it. You don't get to hijack this show. Who's hijacking? Ben replied. I answered your questions. You're the one yelling. You're not welcome here anymore. Gasps, movement in the crowd. A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the audience like an aftershock. Security! Whoopi called out without looking away from him. And then, for the first time all morning, Ben Shapiro smiled. Two large men in black shirts moved toward the stage, slow and deliberate. They weren't rushing. They weren't sure if they should be rushing. This wasn't a drunken heckler or a rowdy audience member. This was Ben Shapiro. And the cameras were still rolling. The studio audience erupted, half shocked, half outraged. No way, someone whispered. Is this real? Are they really kicking him out? Another voice said louder. Ben remained seated, calm. Almost too calm. He looked toward the security team and lifted a hand, not in protest but in poise. No need for that, he said evenly. I'll leave. Then, without breaking eye contact with Whoopi, he stood. I came in good faith. You met me with hostility, he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. Let the record show. I was asked to leave for answering your questions too honestly. The audience was stunned. A few clapped, then more joined. Then others began to boo, not at Ben but at the hosts. Whoopi's jaw tightened. We have a responsibility to protect our space. From disagreement? Ben shot back. Security flanked him, but never touched him. He adjusted his jacket, turned to the crowd, and said simply, Thanks for watching. The applause that followed wasn't unanimous, but it was thunderous. Whoopi turned away, furious. Offstage, a producer mouthed toward the control room, Cut! Cut! Cut to black. But they were too late. The moment was already live, and it had already gone viral. The footage hit the internet within minutes. Some clips showed Ben calmly walking off set, flanked by security, adjusting his suit jacket like nothing had happened. Others, more aggressively edited, framed it as an ejection, a hostile takedown, a loud, triumphant Whoopi and a defeated Shapiro. But the raw footage told the truth. He wasn't dragged out. He left on his own terms. That didn't stop the narratives from multiplying. One news outlet ran with, Ben Shapiro escorted out after toxic exchange with The View hosts. Another countered, Ben Shapiro silenced on national television for speaking truth. Hashtags erupted. Shapiro on The View. Whoopi meltdown. Free speech or fiction. ABC's crisis PR team was already drafting statements, but the damage had metastasized. Clips were everywhere. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. One 10-second edit of Ben saying, You're doing the work for me had already racked up 500,000 views. Meanwhile, on cable news, the pundits weighed in. Some applauded Whoopi for taking a stand. Others blasted her for losing control. Still others pointed out what no one on The View wanted to admit. Ben had never raised his voice. The only thing louder than his words was the reaction to them. Back in his dressing room, Ben scrolled through the headlines. His phone buzzed nonstop. Interviews, podcasts, reaction requests. Jordan sat across from him, wide-eyed. That just made you the story. Ben looked up. No, he said. They made me the story. And outside that studio, the storm kept growing, because no one could agree on what they had just seen. By sunset, the entire media world was ablaze. Major outlets scrambled to frame the narrative. The View released a clipped segment of the confrontation, conspicuously edited to soften Whoopi's outburst and eliminate the audience applause that followed Ben's final words. But it was too late. The uncut versions had already flooded every platform. Commentators went live within hours. On YouTube, conservative creators dissected the takedown frame by frame. Ben kept his cool while they crumbled. One popular host declared, This is what happens when you invite truth into a propaganda chamber. Liberal pundits weren't silent either. Ben Shapiro weaponizes politeness, one headline read. He's the kind of dangerous that smiles while dismantling progress. Social media was a battlefield. Some viewers called it the moment The View lost the culture war. Others accused Ben of calculated disruption and demanded ABC issue a formal apology for even inviting him. Behind the scenes, the producers of The View were frantic. Audience sentiment was shifting. Sponsors were calling. Internal emails leaked revealing disagreements between executives over whether Whoopi should apologize or double down. Staffers whispered that the table had never felt so fractured. Meanwhile, Ben stayed silent. No response tweet, no press release, just silence. It spoke louder than any statement, and that silence made the public ask, was this a one-off moment? Or was it a symptom of something far bigger? The View tried to spin the story, but the story had already spun out of their control. The conference room at ABC headquarters was a pressure cooker. Executive producers, legal counsel, and crisis PR consultants sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the viral clip on loop. Every playback hit harder than the last. No one spoke during the final 30 seconds of the footage. Ben Shapiro rising, delivering his parting line, and the audience applauding as Whoopi seethed. "This is not what we agreed to," one VP said, slamming her hand on the table. "Where was the commercial cut? Where was the control?" A lawyer adjusted his glasses. "You don't eject a guest live without cause. That's exposure. If he sues, we're wide open." "But he's not suing," another muttered. "He doesn't have to." The damage was reputational and spreading. By morning, major advertisers were asking questions. Two hinted at pulling support if The View didn't issue a statement clarifying what happened. Whoopi, for her part, wasn't backing down. She stood by her actions, told staff she had no regrets, refused to read the network's drafted apology script. "I'm not apologizing for refusing to let someone belittle what I've lived through," she said bluntly. "If that gets me in trouble, so be it." But privately, the tone was shifting. Sunny and Joy were quiet. The crew, normally chatty post-show, had gone silent. The camaraderie that once held the table together felt frayed. The audience? Still divided, but louder. In the wings of daytime television's most powerful platform, the woman who'd once anchored it now stood isolated. And Ben hadn't said a word since walking off. That silence? It was strategy. 3 days later, Ben Shapiro's silence ended. He didn't post a thread. He didn't drop a viral video. He went old school, live radio, his flagship show. The intro music faded. He cleared his throat. "Let's talk about The View." Listeners leaned in. The internet braced. "I was invited to a daytime program supposedly designed for open conversation," he began. "What I got instead was a coordinated ambush, thinly disguised as a panel. A performance, not a discussion." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't insult, he simply told the story with surgical calm. "They told my team we'd be covering public discourse, free speech, maybe some cultural flashpoints. What we walked into was an attempted hit job. But here's the part that matters. The audience saw it. In real time, and they didn't buy it." He played the raw clip, unedited. The moment he stood. The applause. The stunned silence from the hosts. And then he let it breathe. "No matter where you stand politically," he said, "if you care about civil discourse, that segment should terrify you. Because what they wanted wasn't dialogue. They wanted submission. And when I didn't give it, they tried to erase me. On live TV." The phone lines exploded. So did social media. But Ben didn't fan the flames. He closed with this. "I didn't go there to fight. I went there to speak." They turned it into a fight, and that, more than anything, tells you what The View has become. And with that, the narrative slipped completely out of ABC's hands. In the days that followed, the ripple became a wave. Clips of the confrontation were repackaged, reframed, and shared by influencers across the spectrum. Some called it a masterclass in restraint. Others called it proof that The View had outlived its purpose. But one thing no one could deny. Something changed in that studio. Ratings spiked, for the wrong reasons. Audience sentiment split down the middle. The most loyal viewers defended Whoopi with hashtags and comment threads. But a new audience, young, disillusioned, skeptical, had seen something raw, something revealing. A BC scrambled to contain the fallout. Behind closed doors, executive decisions were being debated. Whoopi Goldberg took a leave of absence to reflect. Joy Behar canceled a media appearance. Sunny Hostin stayed silent. And Ben? Ben did what Ben always does. He moved on. Back to his show, back to lectures, back to debates. Stronger than before. The confrontation didn't damage his brand, it cemented it. And for The View, the consequences were just beginning. Producers began re-evaluating guest strategy. Advertisers re-evaluated positioning. For the first time, people began asking out loud what role the show plays in today's culture war. Because in that single moment, captured live, broadcast without edits, a truth was exposed. When honest disagreement becomes dangerous, we are no longer having conversations. We're staging purges. So what do you think? Was Ben Shapiro justified? Or did Whoopi Goldberg just ask the wrong question? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and tell us, who do you want us to cover next? Thanks for watching.